and welcome. Happy Wednesday. I hope everybody is having a wonderful day towards this end of February. This Q1, it's just going so fast. The next time that we blink, it's going to be the summer at this point in time, which actually makes the topic of today on how to navigate transitions, I think, pretty a topic that we need to talk about because I feel like this is going so fast. No matter what, we just need to be on top of what we're doing in our lives, whatever that is. And here with me today is Arivee Vargas. I'm just so excited to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. So, you definitely know about transitions. I know that this is, in a way, something that you talk a lot about in different ways and in different spaces. And I think this year in particular, all of us are going through some kind of a transition, whether it's a personal transition, whether it's at work, whether it's in a professional perspective, it's in our business, it's in our minds, it's in our body. Whatever it is, I feel like everybody that I've spoken to is going through a transition, and that takes a toll on us, whether we are conscious about it or whether we're not conscious about it. So let's start there, like from your lens and from your point of view and from your expertise, like let's kick it off.
Yeah, I love this topic because of what you said. It's something that everyone goes through, although it can take shape in different ways. And even for me, and you know this, Eliana, that, even my transition from lawyer and corporate executive into entrepreneurship, that first like 3-4 months of entrepreneurship was very hard. And I tell people all the time that literally what saved me was just staying grounded in what I wanted and my intentions and my purpose. It doesn't mean that when you're going through a transition or some kind of pivoting or some kind of pivotal crossroads that you don't feel unhinged, because you can feel that way. And you were talking about, feeling it in your body. And I felt it like in my body, spirit, mind, everywhere. It doesn't mean you don't feel unhinged, but because you might, but it's that you always have a grounded anchor. Like you have an anchor that's your, why are you doing this? What are you after? What matters most to you? I think an anchor that's always helped me through transition, and what helps a lot of people through transitions and really tough, like pivotal moments, is anchoring themselves in what matters most in that specific moment. So, for example, if you're going through, even for me, when I went through my own transition of, becoming an entrepreneur, which was really difficult. And when I say difficult, I say that to say that when you've been trained to be on 24/7, and then you give yourself a quote unquote break, your body goes into detox. It literally goes in detox because it doesn't have the same adrenaline dopamine rush it had every time you had a Teams message, every time you got a Slack message, every time someone needed you in an email or at a meeting. You feel a little differently about your place. And when you do that for almost 20 years and you say, yeah, but I'm fulfilling my purpose by pursuing a life that is more true to me, and for me to help empower women to live a life that's truest to them. That still was hard for me to, like the physical transition was difficult for me, right? And so when I talk about transitions, I always try to tell people that it's going to be messy and it's going to feel messy, and that's part of it. That's part of what it's normal to feel that way. But the key is to always bring yourself back to, okay, what's most important for me in this moment? What do I need to focus on next? Not, 2 months from now. It's actually like, what's the next right thing for me to do? And how can I anchor myself right now? Because when we look too far, it gets overwhelming. When we think of all the things, we get overwhelmed. So we got to lessen the overwhelm and just focus on what's the next right thing for me right now, and what do I need to focus on? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Eliana?
I think you have shared a lot of great points that I want to unpack. But before we unpack them, as I was hearing you, I'm like, okay, there's moments, like you say, there's the messiness, there's the trying to figure out where I'm going, what's important to us in this moment, like all of those things. What happens, and have you ever been in the situation, or as you coach other people and as you had conversations with other people, they don't know that they're in transition? Because sometimes you're in the messiness and you already know you're
Yes.
already know you're there.
Yes.
However, that requires a level of consciousness that you're in it. You might not know how to get out of there, but you're in it. But there are moments in time where you're in transition and you don't know it. You just feel like the world is upside down. You want to throw yourself out the window, but you don't realize that that's what's happening. And you start blaming it on everybody. And I think the chaos is even messier
Mhm.
because you don't know you're in transition. So how do we move from the unconsciousness to the consciousness of recognizing the signs?
Yes, again, I love that you said this because I use the example of, and this happens to so many people, especially when they become new mothers. There is this massive identity transition, and it's not just when your child is an infant. It is longer than that. It's like a longer period of time where you're like in between the old life you had when you didn't have children and this new, you're now a mother. And I still to this day, Leanne, I'm like, I'm a mom of three people, of three children, right? Like there's this, like you're kind of in between. And I always say certain signs to look for so you can know and be aware that you're in that kind of transition period or even in between is you feel like this push and pull in different directions, especially like this way where you're feeling pulled to in this direction or pulled forward in this direction and it goes back and forth and you feel an internal tension. It's like a rubber band, it's stretching and you feel that way because you feel uneasy, like inside nothing is settled. And not that you will always feel settled and peaceful. That's not true. Life always has stresses and challenges. But there is something about when you're feeling really unstable internally, it's often that like rubber band is stretching, or you're feeling that pull back and forth between two different things or three different things. And that's what's causing you like discomfort, like you're feeling uneasy. Something doesn't feel right. It's like something doesn't feel right. Why don't I feel like myself? Why is my head here and it's also over here? That's some of what I've seen. And it's interesting because I've had clients who reach out for certain reasons, like, hey, I don't know if I want to make partner at my firm. They're starting to talk to me and I'm not sure if I want to do that. They don't realize that they're already in a transition. Meaning, they're reaching out because they're saying, I don't know if I want to do that. It's because they already feel pulled because they're at that point where you're either going to go for it or you're not. And if you're not going to go for it, you got to go. Like usually firms are like, you got to go somewhere else, right? And so they're already in that transition of like, do I want it? Do I want it? Knowing what's going to be required of me, knowing that it's going to be really difficult, knowing that it doesn't get easier as a partner, it gets more difficult and it gets more taxing. But maybe you want to do that. Or do I really not want that at all and want a different kind of life, still being a lawyer, still feeling, proud of my work? That those two ends pulling each other kind of apart, they're already in that. They wouldn't have reached out if they didn't know something is off. I need to figure this out. So that's like another way to think about it is when you're feeling like something is off. I don't feel like myself. I'm unsteady. Like that means you're probably in some kind of transition.
I love that you're saying, and it is a difficult moment. Sometimes it feels, I hear you talking about your kids. My kids are almost out of college, one of them and the other one. And I still feel like I'm like, oh my God, I have college kids.
Because you're always in a transition of their age. Like they're different ages.
I know. It just feels like the never-ending story. But you talk about something very important at the beginning about grounding ourselves and giving ourselves grace in these moments, because it is transitions are hard. It's moving ourselves out of this comfort zone, and we tend to be in comfort because I mean that's our bodies and our brains trying to keep us safe. So anything that is not in a routine, and that is not something that we know, obviously it's going to keep increasing those tension moments. So once you identify, okay, I may be going through this change moment, that do we just then like jump right into it? Do we, is it like a pool and we just do a deep dive and figure out the best, or do we take it like a step by step at a time? And how do we ground, because you talk about the grounding, and I love that because I hadn't thought about it that way. Like, how do you find in this turmoil that thing that's going to keep you sane, so that the turmoil, basically, I see it like a wave. It doesn't just take you with it.
You know, Eliana, I love this question because it's something this is something I do talk about in my book, Your Time to Rise. And it really does, to have the grounding and to see the forest from the trees and to be like, have some calmness a little bit in the storm. You really do have to know yourself. Now, many people, it takes something external to happen to them, or some kind of like internal turmoil like this through a transition, to have them double down and understand a little bit more about who they are and what matters most. So I talk about this in Your Time to Rise, where you really do need to understand yourself, meaning understanding what you value the most, like your three core values, what you value the most. And core values are simply like the set of beliefs and principles you live by. So for example, two of my top core values are well-being and freedom. And freedom to me, because terms mean different things to different people. Freedom to me doesn't mean I do what I want, although I love that. If that's for you, I love that, that phrasing or that framing. For me, freedom means I get to decide what I do. I have choice. And that's something that is so important to me as like first generation Latina, as someone who's worked very hard, as someone who has sacrificed a lot, whose parents have sacrificed a lot, and whose parents didn't have the same opportunities. I find that to be something that's very important to me. And well-being, because I've experienced burnout, depression, anxiety, all of the things, all of the darkest things that were so awful, but taught me so much and made me understand that no, your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health is actually everything. Because without that, nothing matters. So it's anchoring yourself on, what are my three core values? Like, what are the principles and beliefs that I live by? Where, Eliana, if I saw a picture of your week or your month, I could tell those are your core values. Like, it has to be that apparent, right? So for well-being, like, I take care of my body, I have therapy, I have a coach, like I have things that you will be able to see in my life. The other thing to know is knowing what your purpose is. And I say this, I don't mean to say it's a life purpose. Not everybody feels like this, have this grand life purpose, although I believe we all have a purpose to live a full life, like a full, true, alive life that you feel like you've lived. You didn't just live the same day over and over again, right? And so for me, when I say having part of your anchoring is your three core values, your purpose, meaning why do you believe that you're here? And what kind of life do you want to live? You don't have to be always feeling uneasy or dissatisfied. That's not part of the deal. The deal is that you live a full life. So what does that mean for you? What does a fulfilling life mean to you? That's the purpose. Like, that's the purpose of your life. And then the third piece is like a trifecta, is what are my strengths? Like, what makes me me? And no one else will have the same combination of core values, purpose, and strengths. Everyone is so different. And so that forms a lot of your North Star, right? Is those three things that keep you anchored and grounded. So sometimes when there's a lot of turmoil and overwhelm, we often will go outwards and we're like, oh, what do you think? What do you think? What should I do? And we have to learn to go inward first, to dig deeper into those questions and answer those questions honestly.
Now, what happens, and we were sort of briefly talking about this before we came on air. Could you talk about the transition when people are either on it or are thinking about it? They don't realize that they're heading towards the transition. What happens when you're forced into it? Like,
Yes.
today you had something, a life, whatever it was, And tomorrow, guess what? That life does not exist. And it could be because of personal reasons, it could be because of family reasons, it could be because you lost a job, it could be because your business, whatever it was, right? Normally those are very like shocking moments that you go through a transition that you weren't expecting.
Yes.
Is there anything additional that we can do to then continue to find that grounding moment? Because at that moment in time, your life just blew up.
Yes. No, I think that's such a good point because there is especially with grief, when you lose a loved one, for many people, for many people, that propels them into a transitional period in their life where they start rethinking things. And that's a transition. That's an identity transition. That's really, that's one of the hardest ones there is, because you're questioning literally everything about how you're living based on someone passing away, and you thinking to yourself, oh shoot, life actually is short and time is actually finite. So that's one example where people tend to have that experience. And also I find it, especially recently, a lot of layoffs, right? Where you lose your job, or, things get really difficult. And for those moments, and I had a client, a few, who had severe grief. Um, and what we focused on is, and the severe grief forced them to be like, I don't even know what I'm doing with my life. That's the kind of questions they were asking themselves. And one of the first things we did was we worked on getting back to like them, meaning like they had to take care of themselves. Like that was the first thing, is taking care of themselves, meaning not pushing themselves too hard to like figure everything out all at once. It was, what's the next thing I can do today for myself? What's the tiniest thing I can do today to take care of myself? And not rushing the grieving process, or the not just the grieving process, but not rushing getting to answers now, because we want answers now. We want certainty now. I want to know how it's going to turn out now. And when you have an external event that's like, let's just call it's traumatic, it's a trauma to you, you have to take your time and be compassionate with yourself. And you got to be okay with sitting in like the murkiness and the like, it just doesn't feel great. And you have to sit there and say, okay, what can I do for myself next? Like if you take anything from this conversation, it has to be, what is the next best thing I can do for myself? Just the next best thing, because when we focus there, everything else will make sense. But we can't do step 10 if we haven't really done what's immediately necessary with step 1. And what I've seen with external events like that, like grief or a layoff or something like that, is you have to focus on the next right thing for you, because you're not going to be able to see. It's going to be too overwhelming for you to see way ahead. So we don't do the core value work, purpose trait. We don't do that work until we get some kind of homeostasis, and understand that the grieving process, even when you lose your job, in addition to losing a person, they're not the same, but the grief can feel that way, is that the grieving process and what you're going to go through is not going to be linear. It's going to be kind of like this. And we have to be okay with that. And knowing that that's normal. That's the human experience, right? It's hard to accept though, Liana. Like that's hard to accept for a lot of people. For me too, though. Like you want to feel better now. You want to have the answers now. You want to figure it out, do the thing. It's just, that's not how life works oftentimes. And people who make it seem like that's true, it's not. It's just simply not.
Absolutely. I think the patience that we
Yes.
have, even patient people don't have the patience that we used to have, I don't know, 50 years ago or 20 years ago. The
Yeah.
other thing that I found very powerful is, which resonates with everything that you're saying, is just the power of pause. We've
Yes.
forgotten how to pause and how to breathe in some way, and not only like physical breathing, but just
Mhm.
breathing through the moment to be able to then gather, to your point, that homeostasis, that moment of level setting that needs to happen so that you can see then what's coming, or at least you can have a little bit more clarity into what the options are, so that then you can start choosing. Because I love what you said about the power of choice. So what am I going to do next? But you
Yes.
can't decide if you don't give yourself a moment of pause and breathing.
Even a simple reset, Eliana, like
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times, and this is such a tiny example. It doesn't meet the gravity of the things we're talking about, but I think it's a
Yeah.
good example of how pausing can be so powerful. Is I do this thing called the Sunday brain dump, where I dump everything in my brain that I have to do, even things that are just not to dos, but they're just things I'm thinking about. I dump them onto a piece of paper, and then I structure them, and I'm like, okay, personal, business, whatever it is, and then I schedule things on my calendar and I throw away the list, or I keep in my calendar the things that are like, oh, remember this for this week, someone's birthday or what, or anything like that. And let me tell you that the purpose of that is not to count. The real purpose of it is not to calendar my to-do list. The real purpose of it is for me to stop and think about what I have to do so that I don't
Yeah.
get overwhelmed on Monday morning and I'm focused on what I need to get done, and so that I can clear space in my brain for other things. And I can release stress from my body by putting it on paper. But that's a power of a pause that is so, it takes 10 minutes to do, but it makes you feel so much lighter when you do that. And when people, and Eliana, you know this, you know the health benefits of meditation, journaling, breathing. We all know them, right? But we don't do them because we're like, we don't have
Oh,
time. And I say, look, I go, let me tell you, I saw you on IG on your stories. You have time. You have time. Go check that there's like a way that to check how much time you
yeah.
spend on. And this isn't to shame people that are on their phone all the time. What I am saying is that if you say you don't have time to take a pause, then you don't have time to go on social media. Then you don't have time to be checking your
Yeah.
personal email all the time in the wee hours, right? Like we have to be clear about what's important to us. And I'm telling you, if people are listening and they're like, okay, I'm gonna try like a meditation. What I'm saying is you're not gonna feel great the first 10 times you try it. You have to actually keep doing it for it to actually work for you and for you to feel the benefits. So I always say that pausing takes different forms, and you do have to find what works for you, but you can't give up too soon before you feel the benefits of it. Like you have to be really careful about that. And I find for my clients, journaling is the number one thing they find to be so incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. We're getting to the end of this. But I want to
No.
touch. I know it's so it goes by so fast. We can have these conversations on and on. All of our cafecitos are always so amazing because of that. Um,
Yes.
but I want to touch on another thing that you mentioned, because sometimes I feel that especially women and especially Latinas, and I don't want to stereotype, but I see it consistently happening on many of us. We feel that we have to have the answers ourselves. And
Yeah.
we are the ones that have to come up with the answer, the solution, show up and smile and be perfect. You're crying inside, you're like broken in a thousand pieces, but you're still showing up like, oh, nothing is happening. Oh, you want me to do that as well? Yes, of course. Bring it on to my 1,000 list of things that I'm not going to get to, but still,
Yes.
yes, like
Yes.
I'll still do that. And going back to the grace piece, like how can we say no? How can we tap into others and recognize that we can't do it alone and that we really need to reach out to other people, recognize that there are resources to help us, that we need to have a support system, because going through this process of transition, I had
Mhm.
a doctor once that told me when I was about to have my first kid, you're not going to get a medal for this. Like nobody's going to give you a medal for showing, braveness through this moment.
Right.
So ask for
Get
help.
the I there's so much that you said you could do a separate cafecito on boundaries, a separate cafecito on grace and how you actually build resilience through having more compassion with yourself. Like there's so many things you could do, even your own little cafecito on it. I will say a few things. One, and I talk about this in Your Time to Rise, the cultural beliefs that we hold that actually start to hold us back a bit in the corporate professional setting, like saying yes so much, because there's a deference to authority and deference to seniority that we experience, especially as Latinas culturally. When you grow up, it's like there's a very strong patriarchy. Though we have very strong women in our lives, it's still a patriarchy and it's very hierarchical. And I allow my children to voice their opinions. I'm sorry, that was not a thing in my house growing up. I had no opinions. I was a child. Like, that is not traditional Dominican households. That's not how it was. You did what you were told, and you were good when you did what you were told, right? And it being good, that's what it really meant. It was not, you were not allowed to go outside that box. You had to stay in your lane. And so we take that mentality and mindset into the workplace, where you actually you have to advocate for yourself. You have to learn how to say no. You have to stop with feeling so grateful and flattered that someone asked you to do something, because the chances are they asked someone else and they were like, no. And they asked you because, like, well, she'll do it. Yes, you're a high performer, but you will still be a high performer if you say no. Right? But we have internalized this idea that if we say no, we're communicating something else. We're communicating we're not grateful for the opportunity. We're communicating we're not thankful that you thought of me. But you can say that. Thank you so much for thinking of me for this opportunity. I probably can't handle that right now, given everything else that's on my plate. I wouldn't be able to give it the attention it deserves, but please keep thinking of me for next time, because I would love to do it. Like, very easy to, now I say that, Ileana, but when I was starting out in my career 20 years ago, I didn't have that language. I was like, yes, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you want. Right? But I learned the hard way, but I also learned from watching people. How do we protect our time and our energy? Because it's finite. And when you let it spread too thin, you start making mistakes. You can't be at your best when you do that. And so I think there's so much there on, especially on boundaries and how to navigate kind of unlearning the things that haven't been helpful to us, right? But keeping the good stuff. Like, as Latinas, we work so hard. We have so much grit. We have so much resilience. And then at the same time, we're like, yeah, I have so much grit. I'm so strong. I have so much resilience. I can handle anything. And I'm like, but you can't handle the plate on top of the plate on top of the plate of things. So we need to be more comfortable. That's why I love United Latinas, being more comfortable with extending ourselves to our community and being like, how can I be helpful to you? You and Ileana are really good at that. When we have events, you're like, ask someone, how can I help you? Be very direct and specific about it. And then also, being able to ask the question and being able to receive help. And if you receive help, it is not about you being weak and that you're not strong enough to handle it on your own. Because the truth is, everyone you see out there doing the big things, they have so much support and help. And that's how you get there, right? So, but this is like, Ileana, even for me as an entrepreneur, community has been so pivotal and critical. And I even had to learn, I'm still learning how to like send the emails and be like, hey, I would love to speak at your organization. Hey, I'm still learning that. Like, I still press the button send and I'm like, oh, just one more. Like, I still am experiencing that. But I think we get better at it the more we practice it.
I love that. And yes, we're going to have one on resilience. We're going to have one on setting boundaries. I just wrote them down. Coming up. But this has been, as always, a wonderful conversation, Arivee. Thank you so much for being here. Any like final thoughts, messages, anything?
Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, I love being in conversation with you and in community with you, with United Latinas, like all the time. So that's like one final thought. But the second final thought, if I can have two final thoughts, is to not forget that it may feel like sometimes you don't have control over anything, but you have control over something. You have like this sphere of control in your life. And my hope is that people learn to exercise their power in that sphere of control. Like, you can't change an environment. Like, corporations change at like a glacial pace, and society does too. But you have this power that you may not have completely unlocked yet in your sphere of control. So focus on like, what can I do with what I have in this sphere of control? Like, what's my next right move there? Focus there, and that will help with relieving some overwhelm, getting you to focus and letting you be a little bit more intentional.
I love that. Thank you so, so much for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your passion, for sharing your book, which is amazing. If you haven't read it, that you're listening to us, you need to get your Time to Rise from Arivee, because it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And continue to listen to us here in the Cafecitos every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on your favorite social media platform. And we have a lot of events coming up, but the two most important ones are our leadership meeting that's happening in a couple of weeks on Tuesday, the 11th. You can find the information to register on our website, unitedlatinas.com/events. And of course, our 5th annual first in-person Latina Leadership Conference. It's going to be amazing. The topic is on brave voices, and we are just going to have so much fun, so much empowerment, so much inspiration that whatever transition you're going through, believe me, after that, you're going to take it on and you're going to say, I can do it, because guess what? That's what this community is all about, to be able to help each other, to be able to hold hands and know that we're not alone in this process. And this year will be the best year yet because of that. So don't miss out on being in the conference with us and joining us. It's going to be in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And tickets will continue to be on sale. So join us for that. Other than that, thank you so much for being us. Thank you, Arivee.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Wednesday and see you next week. Oh, by the way, see you next week, because we're launching the Extraordinary Latinas Volume 4 book. So many things happening. So we are going to have a special cafecito for the launch of the Extraordinary Latinas Volume 4. We're going to have here all of the authors so that they can chat and they can share about their chapters. So yes, please join us next week. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.